Hey, can you
Was
hear
that you,
me?
Ray?
Yeah, that's me.
Wow, you're early. That's really good of you.
How early am I? 5 minutes?
Yes, I'm just going to
Okay.
have to link you up shortly to my Facebook page. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Shouldn't
Sure.
take a moment. So listen, I'm really, really grateful for this. The
Oh, you're welcome.
astrology is a big part of my life, has been. My wife's an astrologer. I think I've said that.
Oh,
Um, I
that's
heard
great.
you, she was listening to some podcast. I heard you talking also about COVID. That excited me because
Yeah.
this thing I'm doing with Facebook every Wednesday night is for people who've been following me for years, and I thought I should do something around COVID, about anxiety and fear and so on. And then I followed the coincidences, and here we
There
are.
I am. Great.
I know that the audience is really excited about hearing from you. You know, some of them will have a vague interest in astrology, others will just be fascinated that I'm speaking to you. Why? And then there's
So
people who
would
I
this
think
be live? Is this live or is this
was not
recorded?
not not going live yet. So I'll just hook those guys through, and then
No, I
I'll
mean when we begin the interview and all that, will it be live then? Or
yes,
is it
yes.
okay? Okay, so we'll be okay.
So
Got
let
it.
me just do the thing I need to do to get the
Sure. Get
guys
yourself
on,
ready. Yeah.
and we can rock
Okay.
away. They're
Take your time.
they're I asked them to come on early just in case the technology didn't work so easily because I'm not techie. Um,
Yeah.
but they usually expect us to kick off at 7. So I'll just go and find them now,
Yeah.
check they're there, and I'll come back and we begin. Yeah?
Fine. That's
Good man.
okay. I'll be
Give me a
here.
moment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you, Ray.
hmm
Okay, guys. Hope you're all there. Just about to begin. Ray and I have hooked up a little bit earlier, which is good because I believe now the technology is working. So let me go back to Ray and I'll introduce you to him, and then we'll begin our session. And again, like as usual, I'm really, really looking forward, and I'm sure Ray might well be, to see all the comments that flow in during and after the event. So I see them happening already. So thanks for the feedback, guys. I'll go back to Zoom now, and we'll start the thing proper. Okay. Well, here we have Ray Merriman, guys. Yeah, you think you know how things work with me. It's like coincidence and metaphor and things happening at the right time. And as I told you a few weeks ago, came across Ray. My wife's an astrologer. She was listening to a podcast. He kind of blew me away. It was my birthday, in fact. We went out for a walk and a glass of champagne and a little cake, a keto cake, and I was blown away just listening to this as a birthday treat. And I thought you guys would love to hear him, especially as he started to talk a little bit about COVID. So anyway, so here we have Ray Merriman. Thanks for coming on. I'm absolutely delighted, and I'm sure the audience are getting excited right now.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me as your guest. I appreciate that.
It's a pleasure. I'm just going to turn up the volume a wee bit for myself here. Okay. So Ray, some of the guys who'll be watching this will have a vague interest in astrology. They've maybe heard me occasionally mention it. It's a big part of my life. For some of them, I've recommended they consult astrologers that I know.
Yes.
But the vast majority probably have a passing awareness of it, but not really understand it. But what would be amazing, I think, if you could tell us a wee bit about your backstory, how you get into this, and where you are now with it, that would be just amazing.
Yes. Well, I started astrology during my postgraduate studies in psychology at Michigan State University. We're going back to the late 1960s, maybe 1967, 1968.
Wow.
And I was interested in a professor named Dr. Milton Rokeach, who put together a values survey, 18 long-term values, 18 short-term values, and he would give them to different, segments of society and see if there's major differences in values.
Yeah.
There'd be things like world of beauty, world peace, family security, salvation, financial security, stuff like this. And I was under the impression at that time, I had a strong intuition that a subculture was forming in the world. At the time, they were known as flower children. They were turning on, tuning in, and dropping out. Okay, and I thought this is a subculture, based on my understanding of social psychology. So I wanted to use his value survey to find out, if in fact there is a statistical significance between these people and the other groups that he had surveyed.
Yeah.
So I presented this idea to him and he was excited about it. And I had to get at least 100 people to take the survey who actually fit the criteria. And the criteria were they had to live in communes and, dropped out of society and sort of anti-establishment. But the basic thing was they decided to live in communes, farms, and other communal living situations.
Yeah.
And the thing is that getting 100 people to take that survey was not easy. They were not interested in surveys, but I did finally find them after about a year and a half. But the interesting thing was that every commune I went to, I was always asked, "What is your sign?" "What sign are you?" And I thought, what sign are you? So with that, I thought, if I'm going to really try to understand this subculture that I think is developing, I better go study astrology. Well, it happened at that same time that several of my friends who I was going to college with had dropped out, and they went to Haight-Ashbury, and they came back with an astrology book. They were into astrology. So they turned me on to a book by an English astrologer named William Davidson. It's called Astrology, strangely enough. And it was a great book. And I thought, here I am studying to be a psychologist. And here's a study, the oldest study known to humanity, that already is like instant psychology.
Yes.
So that's what got me into astrology, was through psychology and my background in working a postgraduate degree. Yeah.
Wow. And so where has that journey taken to you now? I mean, obviously you take an interest back then, but you've become, you've got this huge thing in the financial markets, but you must have been a bit of a journey with it. Can you tell us a wee bit more about that?
Yeah, there was a big jump from the late 60s through, well, let me just take that story one step further. So there was a war going on then, the war in Vietnam. And of course, I didn't want to fight it. A lot of my colleagues and students, friends didn't want to fight it, and I was married and I was in graduate school, but I got drafted anyway. And I'm thinking, I got to do something here. Well, just before I got drafted, I had transferred to another university, Oakland University, and I wanted to do a thesis on the correlation between seasons of birth and paranoid schizophrenia. And so I was studying abnormal psychology at that point. That was a subtext of my interest. And I found a professor who was interested in this study. And he says, I'll sponsor you if this is what the thesis is you want to work on. But, we got to do a pilot test first. I'm going to give you 15 birth dates of people who are clinically diagnosed paranoid schizophrenics from Clinton Valley State Hospital. Yeah. And I'm going to give you 15 other random dates that I pick. And you tell me, you got the whole semester, you tell me which one are the paranoid schizophrenics. Well, I had a theory, and it was that the sun or Mercury would be in a hard aspect to Neptune. Yeah. Okay. Now, it's not necessarily you're going to be a paranoid schizophrenic if you have that, but if you are paranoid schizophrenic, chances are you have this issue with trust and imagination. Yeah. So he gave me the 15 birth dates, 2 sets of 15 birth dates, and next day I came back and said it's group 1, because group 2 had 6 out of 15, which is normal. I mean, 40% of the people got one of those signatures, but the other group had 13 out of 15. And
Wow.
he was quite mystified by that. He says, wow, that's pretty impressive. Well, unfortunately, that's when I got drafted and I had to leave my college background and serve my country in other ways.
Yeah.
So now from there, after I did my service to my country, it was an alternative service. I was working with adolescent delinquents at that time. I didn't have to go to Vietnam. I was fortunate in that regard.
Yeah.
Because my background, they wanted me to work on the the war going on in America, which is still going on, but
Yeah.
that's another point. Anyway, so I'm teaching young kids astrology, and I'm teaching a lot of people astrology at that time. I opened the first astrology center in Detroit area of Michigan in the early 1970, 71.
Wow.
And one of my clients, no, let me back up. I was getting quite well known because I'd written books in the late 70s, and I was lecturing across the country. One place I stopped at was Tucson, Arizona. And in the audience was a gentleman and his wife, Walter and Teresa Bressert. Walter Bressert was a director for the Foundation of the Study of Cycles, and he's a well-known commodities trader and analyst. He had one of the largest market letters around. He was in the audience, and his wife came up afterwards and invited me and my wife to come to dinner at their place. And I wasn't interested because I don't like to socialize with people in the audience necessarily on that level till I get to know them.
Yeah.
But she says, you know, Ray, I know you like vegetarian food, and we have a macrobiotic cook. And I was just into macrobiotics at that time. So I said, okay, let's do it. Let's go have dinner with Walter Bressert and
Yes.
his macrobiotic cook.
Wow.
So he took me in the back of his house where he had one of his offices. And on the wall, he had charts of gold, the daily prices of gold since it started trading in 1974, I think, on the commodities exchange. And he says, Ray, I don't know much about astrology, but this strikes me as interesting. There's 6 dates here that I've got marked on this chart where Mars went retrograde or direct. Do you notice anything unusual about that? Well, in each case, it was the high or the low of the year. You know, this happens every 2 years, but that was the high of that year and the low of that year when it were in retrograde and direct.
Wow.
And 3 times, well, 6 times, but 3 times in pairs, 6 out of 6. And he said, Ray, if I gave you these charts, do you think you could do some research and see if there's other correlations? Would you be interested? And I said, yes. So that began my work with commodities and astrology, and it led to the gold book, Geocosmic Correlation of Gold Price Cycles, the first quantitative study ever done on planets related to a financial market. There have been some on lunar cycles, but nothing on planetary cycles. It was a quantitative study.
Yeah.
I did it. It was 344 pages. I sent it to him 2 years later when I was done. He sent it to Financial News Network. They called me, flew me into Los Angeles, and that was when my career shifted from an astrologer to a financial analyst, financial market timing analyst, because my subscriptions jumped from 35 to 350 in 1 week. So suddenly I had another job, and I enjoyed it, and I loved it ever since.
My goodness, my goodness. And that's fantastic. Just for the relative beginners looking at astrology who probably think it's something you get in a magazine every weekend, you know, the Sunday supplement. Do you want to say something about what it is, as by way of a 5-minute kind of intro to the guys?
Sure. To me, astrology is the study of planetary cycles correlating to cycles in human activity.
Yeah.
Okay. The planets move around the sun in cycles, and as they move around the sun, they form relationships to one another that are cyclical. For instance, you know, the new moon is a cycle. Every 29 days, you get a new moon.
Yeah.
Okay. And the full moon's 29 days apart too. But in between the new moon and the full moon, you got 2 weeks. So you got cycles between planets. You got cycles of planets going around the orbit, the orbit around the sun. And so what we want to look at is, when are those planets coming together? When are they in opposition to each other? And when are they square to each other, you know, 9 degrees apart?
Yeah.
And there's other mathematical relationships too, but those are the major ones called the hard aspects.
Yeah.
So what I've done is I looked at every day that the Dow Jones has traded since 1928. This is back in the late 1990s when I began my 5-volume set on the ultimate book on stock market timing.
Yeah.
So I went and looked at every day the Dow traded, and I would identify where are what Bresser would call the primary cycles, which are highs and lows. Well, they're actually lows that are about 18 weeks apart, give or take 3 or 4 weeks. And where's the high in between them, which is called the crest. And those aren't necessarily evenly spaced. And so we take the primary cycle, we take the phases of them, which would be half primary cycles, which are 9 weeks, or the third phase, which is a major cycle, 6 weeks, or half of that, which is 3 weeks. And I would give them values. I mark every time these primary, half primary, major, or trading cycles occurred, highs and lows. And then I'd go back and I'd look at all the aspects of every day. And I make a list, these are the days that Venus conjunct Mars, and this is the cycle that was present. It was a high, a low, and what type of cycle, and I give it a value.
Yeah.
And so I did that, and it took me about 3 years to finish that project, and that came out about a 450-page book. But from there, I could identify which are the strongest, we call level 1 signatures, correlating to primary cycles in the stock market, as I did with the gold market.
Yep.
And these are the second group, which might be more like half primary or major cycles. And that became the basis of my trading methodology that I put together as a market timer. So whenever we get to those combinations in the heavens, when you're getting those kinds of aspects or a cluster of them happening at once, that's what we call a geocosmic critical reversal date.
Okay.
And when I went back and I checked how many times you got, 4% or greater reversals from that. And it was like 82%. If you give it a 3-day orb, 82% of the time, they would identify those major half primary, primary cycles. That was pretty good. I don't know anything else. Didn't know anything else was better than that. There were some that maybe 80%, but 82.5%. If I gave it 4 days, I think it went to like 89%.
Right.
So this became the basis for market timing by integrating the study of cycles as taught by Walter Bresser, then elaborated on more by myself because I discovered a few cycles myself. Okay, so correlating the planetary cycles and their phases with the market cycles and their phases became my life work, starting in 1982 and accelerated in 1994 after I left the brokerage community because I worked for Wall Street for 8 years. I left that in 1994 to do the research on the stock market. And so I've written about 55, 56 books on that subject now.
My goodness.
Yeah.
My goodness. And do you still presumably face skepticism, possibly even cynicism about it?
Yes. Here's what I've noticed. The investment community, those who are the buy and hold people in the stock market, they really have no interest in this. Their market timing, whether cycles or astrology, no interest at all, because they think the answer is to buy and hold. But that's a fallacy, in my opinion. That's a fallacy. Buy and hold. Just to digress a second, buy and hold means you're not going to buy it till you think it's already bottomed. So you're already missing a third of it. And you think you're going to hold on to it forever, except when it starts coming down, you jump out. So buy and hold people, even if they hold it for 10 years, they tend not to get in right and get out right. Okay. So market timing, although it's more for traders and investors, it's, it's an art. It's a science because there's mathematical correlations you can do with it. But that's the gist of what I do. And go back to your question because I kind of forgot what you asked me.
Just a general introduction to astrology, 5-minute thing.
Yeah. Well, that's
specific specialism, just generally. I mean, I don't think, again, if people think it's what you get in the Sunday supplement magazine, compared to the moment of your birth and where you were born, or the moment a business was born and all of that, or our country, the US.
The whole basis on which astrology rests is expressed very well by Carl Jung in the Book of Changes, the I Ching.
Yeah.
And he said, every moment of time has its own unique quality.
Yeah.
And anything born in that moment takes on the quality of it. Okay. Yeah. So that became the basis for the first book I wrote, which is before I got into financial markets, called Evolutionary Astrology, The Journey of the Soul Through the Horoscope.
Wow.
And as you may know, being involved in astrology in your own family, evolutionary astrology is a pretty active segment of the field of astrology right now. All over the world, they're teaching evolutionary astrology. Well, I wrote the first book in 1977. It became popularized after I got into financial astrology and by other people who are now the evolutionary astrologers. But to the question, yeah, to segregate people into just 12 signs and 12 types, to me, it's important. I don't put that down as an astrologer. I think it's important because it's like a gateway to astrology.
Yeah.
You know, once you get into sun signs, you start seeing some characteristics you can relate to. You get an appetite, a thirst to know more.
Yeah.
And then you begin to realize, well, wait a minute, once I look into this, maybe I'll get an astrology reading from somebody. And then you get really blown away if it's a good astrologer, because that astrologer is taking account your time, your location of birth, and they're constructing the horoscope.
Yeah.
And it's not just a sun sign that covers 30 degrees. It's a sun sign, moon. It's got all the planets in different signs and different aspects to each other in different parts of the heavens.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're born in the daytime versus the nighttime, that means something. Doesn't mean anything if you're an Aries, Taurus, or it means something if you're an Aries, Taurus, or a Cancer, but it means something more if you're a daytime Cancer versus a nighttime Cancer. Okay. And the same thing if you're born when the sun between midnight and noon, you know, that's the waxing part of the day. The earth is decreasing in darkness, increasing in light. That's the creative part of the chart. If you do that, if you're born in the morning, AM, then you have more of a creative nature. But if you're born in PM, you're more of a problem solver. Okay, that's dealing with the issues that are brought to you in the world. So the time means a lot in astrology, and you can't go just by the sun sign.
Yeah, and so I suppose the big thing is how you see the current dynamic of the world. You know, there's so many ways. Obviously the business side of it, but I heard you talk about the general flow of the. I mean, my wife uses words like transits and stuff like that. You know, and the phases. Clearly, anybody observing what's going on in the world right now, it does seem like something quite profound is going on. And I wondered when you're looking at it, what your view of that is. Clearly, the pandemic's massive, the financial thing going on, the politics going on. The world may be ready for some sort of. Those of us who are positive, optimistic, you know, age of Aquarius, is it all going to come good? You know, we're going to change and love one another and all that stuff. But getting back to our hippie days. But maybe you could share a wee bit about how you see it at the moment.
Every year I write a book called the Annual Forecast Book. So for Forecast 2020, and that is our most popular publication, the annual forecast versus our monthly and weekly and daily updates on the markets. But the annual forecast was based a lot on what we call the Capricorn stellium. Okay, this is an unusual year, something that hasn't happened in a long time, like centuries, where you had 3 of the 5 outermost planets conjunct one another in the sign of Capricorn. They were Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto. Okay. Jupiter and Pluto come together every 13 to 14 years. Saturn, Pluto, they come together every 32 to 37 years. And Jupiter, Saturn comes together every 20 years. Well, they're all coming together this year in the sign of Capricorn, except at the very end, Jupiter comes with Saturn in 0 Aquarius. So since this is such a rare thing, and we're moving from the Capricorn through most of this year into Aquarius, the Jupiter, Saturn, and Aquarius at the end of the year, I labeled this as the year that starts a new era. Okay, we're ending an old era. We're going to begin a new era. And at the time, I thought it would be politically, and I thought it'd be economically.
Yeah.
I, nor any astrologer I know going into the year, thought it'd be a pandemic. Now, there is a famous astrologer from France, André Barbault, who did, in one of his earlier writings, I think in the 1990s or early 2000s, say that these are the periods where pandemics can occur. And he did label 2020 as one of those.
Wow.
But it was based on some method he uses of planets, like this coming together, creating a cycle in his mind. But going back to the question about what's going on in the world and how I see it. Well, when you get all those planets in Capricorn, especially Saturn and Pluto, I think every astrologer expected there would be a major transformation, which is a keynote of Pluto, in government, which is Capricorn, in systems, in structures, in politics, which is all Capricorn. Something's going to be torn down here. And in fact, I had one chapter in that book for 2020 dealing with the Saturn Pluto, saying, is it going to be revolution or evolution?
Right.
Okay. And it's both. And by revolution, I said it could actually be literal. There could be revolutions where things, buildings, businesses are torn down physically, literally, and they will be rebuilt. Pluto will rebuild it. Okay. And the rebuilding part is the evolution, because we'll learn so much, like, why was it burnt? Why was it torn apart? So I was looking for things like civil unrest.
Yeah.
And then I began to ask myself, we got a pandemic. Before we had this civil unrest, we had pandemic, and we still got the pandemic. Where is that? Well, as astrologers, we were taught at least I was taught, and I think most professionals I know were taught, that something like disease, problems with the immune system, pandemics, that has to be Neptune. That's Neptune in Saturn or Neptune in Pluto. Okay. Saturn and Neptune does relate to the weakest part of the body, the weakest part of your system. You look at your Saturn Neptune midpoint, any aspects to it, any transits over it, that's when you're weakest. So Saturn and Neptune wasn't in the skies, nor was Neptune and Pluto. They weren't in the skies making aspects to each other. And many astrologers tried to purport the idea, well, it's Saturn and Pluto. They went back, it happens every 37 years, and they said, well, AIDS was the last time Saturn conjunct Pluto. Before that, it was polio. Before that was Spanish flu. Except it's not. That's not it. The Spanish flu was 1918. Saturn and Pluto was 1914. But you know what happened in 1918? Late 1917? Saturn conjunct Neptune. The polio epidemic. Okay, they said that was the big thing when Saturn hit Pluto next time, 1947. No, it was starting, but it wasn't a big epidemic. The big epidemic was 1952. And guess what was going on then? Saturn conjunct Neptune. Then AIDS, you go back and look at AIDS. Well, AIDS was, that the first case of AIDS was, I think it was April of 1980. A gentleman, Ken Horn, in I think his name was in San Francisco, got AIDS as the first reported case of AIDS. Well, Saturn Pluto was November of 1982. This was like 2.5 years earlier. But what was going on in 1980? Saturn square Neptune. So Saturn Neptune has been around pandemics forever, but it wasn't here this time.
Wow.
So I'm thinking, what's going on this time? So I had developed a concept in the Evolutionary Astrology book that I wrote in 1977 and redid a second version in 1991 or 92, where I talked about supercharged degrees of the signs, supercharged degrees in the signs. Okay. And basically this means when a far out planet, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, come together in the heavens, it charges that degree of the zodiac with the themes of those planets until the next conjunction occurs. Okay. So the most important ones are going to be Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, were any of those degrees activated? Well, 1965 and 1966, you had Uranus conjunct Pluto in 15 to 17 degrees of Virgo. Okay, Virgo's a health sign. Uranus and Pluto only come together every 111, 141 years, depending where Pluto is in its orbit around the sun, because it's an elliptical one. So the last time Uranus and Pluto conjunct was 1965, 66, 15 to 17 degrees of Virgo. Therefore, according to this theory, anytime Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto hit that degree or opposition to it, and maybe even square, but especially conjunction or opposition, something major is going to happen in the world. Okay, so here's Uranus and Pluto. And at the same time, Saturn's in opposition to it. Okay. But on the day that COVID-19, the first case of COVID-19 was reported in Wuhan, China, was November 17th, 2019. That was within 10 days that Neptune was changing direction at, guess what? 15 degrees, 57 minutes of Pisces, exactly opposite that Uranus-Pluto conjunction, Virgo, the health crisis.
Wow.
And that will be in effect. The orbit that stays in effect until about February. Now, even though the orbit's in effect till February, it doesn't mean it ends right in February, but probably, I'm guessing within 3 months, it's no longer a major crisis on our minds like it has been recently. And one more thing too, Jack, about that, the peak of this crisis was easy to identify for an astrologer because when Mars conjunct those planets, when it conjunct Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, it was March 20th to March 31st. And so I was able, and I think others, well, I don't know if others were, but I was able to identify that as probably the period of the greatest lethality. Okay, it's going to be its most lethal right then. And from that point onward, the rate of increase is going to start to diminish. And that was the peak. That was the peak right there, March 20th to 31st. So, I mean, we're getting spikes now, but that was the peak of the acceleration.
And do you see, do you see, well, everybody who, I suppose some of us take our sources of our understanding of this COVID thing from various places, not necessarily the mainstream, but from, scientists nevertheless. And there is this thing that you tend to hear about, a second wave and stuff like that. Do you see second waves in any of this sort of astrology, or do you see just petering out eventually, or anything that you notice?
I see a second wave. I know some astrologers don't, but I think most astrologers do. Yeah. And the reason I see a second wave is because the peak of this, I mentioned, was March 20th to 31st, when Mars was conjunct Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto. And from this August through, I think, October, November, I'd have to go look again, but Mars is going to go back. It's going to go up to Aries and square those degrees. It's going to go retrograde, square them again. It's going to go direct and square them a third time. So it's the Capricorn stellium, and it's Mars hitting those degrees. Plus Neptune is back. It's still within that orb of the Uranus and Pluto. So yeah, I do think there's a second wave coming up sometime between August and November, maybe lasting until February, March.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't think it's as lethal as the first wave. And I know many people think the second wave is going to be more lethal. I'm not convinced of it. And I'll tell you why. The conjunction is the important thing, because conjunctions end and begin cycles. And so when Mars hit those planets, that was the peak, and it began a new cycle toward recovery. But when you get to the square, it's like a major decision point. There's something that comes back in. You got to make another major decision to go forward with what you've done or give up. Well, and it's a waxing square, which means it's a square, the 9-degree segment that happens after the conjunction. The waxing square squares are painful. Okay. The waxing square is the pain of birth. The waning square is the pain of realizing that you're at the end. Okay, the matter's coming to an end, and you got to transform dramatically and start over again. But the waxing square, you don't start over again. You just have a crisis in your evolution, in your progress forward. So this is what's happening. I think with that square, what will come out of that square will be either the treatment or the vaccine. And I don't even know if the vaccine, we got to be careful about vaccines too, because they'd be more dangerous than the original disease itself.
Yeah.
So, but that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a second wave coming up sometime between August and November, and maybe lasting to around February. And then I see it's dwindling in its effect on our societies.
Yeah. I mean, I want to move to the financial stuff, but just briefly, this is a long shot. Do you think with astrology and your own experience with COVID in terms of how you dealt with it personally, and are there any insights that might lead us to protect ourselves better? Is there anything like that you see, or am I asking a question that's not appropriate?
No, it's not an inappropriate question, but I would go back again to the fact that this is one of the positive things of the Capricorn stellium, especially when Pluto's involved.
Yeah.
When Pluto's involved, you get the masses involved.
Yeah.
Okay. And when Saturn's with it, you get two types of people. I mean, you can call them good and evil. You can call them heroes and villains, which I do in the book, or you can call them people who are in it because they want to take advantage of other people and capitalize it. They're opportunists in a real bad way, a negative way, versus those who really have a consciousness that we are in this together.
Yeah.
And if we put our mind to it and work as a unit, we're diverse, but if we work as a unit, we will solve it. And we saw that. I mean, how many people self-isolated and practiced social distancing, and they did stop the increase of incidences.
Yep.
That's a beautiful thing that relates to the Saturn Pluto. And I think it's a positive, and I think you're going to see it come back in. I think right now through the end of June, Saturn has moved into Aquarius, okay, from Capricorn, but it's going to move back to Capricorn at the end of June, July 1st through mid-December, which means the very same things we dealt with the first part of this year, they're coming back. Plus you got that Mars squaring it. So that's another reason I think you got the second wave. And it's going to call upon us again to unite as a community, a human community, to fight this virus, if you will, this bug, this threat. And again, I think we'll do it. And then I think it begins to peter off after, we get past that December period, and certainly after February.
Okay, fantastic. I've got my wife wanted me to ask you a question, seeing that she's an astrologer. And she was mentioning, so I hope I get this right, that Uranus, however you pronounce it,
Uranus,
is involved with Taurus in some way. It's either in Taurus or something like that.
It's in Taurus. It's in the sign of Taurus.
And that could be, like the collapse of stuff apparently, or as you've said, a new beginning type of thing. How do you think that might play out? I mean, one of the things I remember going to Oxford University to summer school with Laura, and I was listening in the lectures. She was studying to be an astrologer, but some of them were fascinating. I remember one of the American guys out of New York, a big cheese apparently, saying, that every transit that comes and goes, you can take you can look at it negatively or positively.
Yes.
The obvious thing is we've got free will, given what I teach and what we're all about here, is to choose the positive and drive it and program its strength positively. But I mean, is she right? Is there a potential there to do something special with this Uranus and Taurus?
Well, I agree with that premise too, and I want to elaborate a little bit upon it.
Yeah.
The astrology is an excellent tool for timing. It can tell you the time that certain themes, certain conditions, certain challenges come into your life.
Yeah.
Now, the result of that is not astrology. The result of that is you. You're free. That's where the free will comes. You have a choice here on what the outcome is going to be in at least half the cases, if not many, many more than half. So when you ask me, and somebody asks me, is astrology fatalistic? Is it, going to tell me exactly what's going to happen in the future? It's going to tell you some things, like the time that you're going to meet these challenges, but it's your decision, your choice that's going to determine the ultimate outcome during those periods, and that can be positive or negative. For instance, somebody going through a transit of Uranus, as your wife mentioned, let's say we're dealing with the Taurus, and Uranus is going through Taurus now. So all the Taurus is sometime in this 7-year period from 2018 to 2025 or so is going to have Uranus on their sun.
Yeah.
Some are going to divorce. Some are going to change jobs because they're unhappy. Okay. All of them are going to get a challenge in one of these areas, either in terms of your health, your relationships, or your work. You're going to be challenged if you're a Taurus sometime in the next 7 years.
Yep.
And are you going to be fired, or are you going to actually be looking for something that's going to improve your career, and you're going to take that giant step? You're going to take the risk. People born on the same day can be in the same situation, make a different choice. And one person can get fired because they're unhappy with their job and they just can't stand it. The boss knows it. And the other person says, you know, I'm unhappy here, but I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to go out and get a new job.
Yeah. Yeah.
So both of them went through the crisis, but they came out with different results.
Yes.
So with Uranus and Taurus, Taurus rules money, finances. I mean, that's one of the key words of it. It's securities.
Yeah.
So Uranus and Taurus is shaking up our security, whether it's finances or personal, psychological, sense of security, self-esteem. Everybody's going through this. The whole world's going through this.
Yeah.
And right now, Saturn's entered Aquarius, which is the sign that rules Uranus. Okay. So that means it's special. It's a special square. It's not just an ordinary square. It's a special square because one of the planets in it, Uranus, is disposed of by Saturn in its sign. Okay. And just to give you a little analysis here, the last time Saturn and Uranus were square to each other, it was the opposite way around. Uranus was in Aquarius, Saturn was in Taurus, and that was a dot-com bubble burst.
Wow.
Okay, that was 1999 to 2001 in that period. Now we got it coming up again. It's starting now. It started in March, and it's going to back off a bit after July, after June, but it's going to come back in real strong in 2021. Saturn's going to square Uranus. Okay, so this is a time of, well, Uranus is considered disruptive. It's revolutionary. It's rebellious. It's disturbing. It disrupts whatever sign it's in, which is, again, our security and our values and our foundation. And here's Saturn coming about, which is a government. So you got these protesters. You got these people who want freedom. They want to be liberated. And you've got the government having to deal with its role of whether it's going to be a liberator or a dictator, if you will, an authoritarian. So you got a real authoritarian liberating dilemma coming up here, which is the basis for social unrest.
Yep.
So as I've been calling for the last couple of years, 2020, 2021, even in 2022, is a time you're going to see a lot of major changes. That's the new era, the end of an era, the beginning of a new era in terms of political leadership. And either these political leaders are going to get in touch with the masses, their populations, which is Aquarius and Uranus, that's the masses, or they're going to oppose them and try to squelch them, in which case they will either lose at the ballot box in the election or they'll be thrown out through revolution. Yeah. So you're going to see a lot of that in 2020 and 2021, even in 2022.
Okay.
But the good news about that, Jack, is once we get through that, you know, we're back on to the Renaissance. I think it's apparently you need to have this kind of a cleansing to move forward.
Makes sense, and you can see it emerging into the world just now. So,
yeah,
wow. And so inevitably, some of the people who I know who have been looking forward to this they do follow the markets. They trade every day. They do that stuff. Others, like myself, will have money somewhere. You know, some. You know, I rely on an American company to look after it for me. But what's your view on what people might do about that? I know that some people just trust someone else to look after it. Others are playing with it every day. Any advice you can give it? Because everybody is going to be interested, because clearly this change we're talking about will affect economies and, you know, shares and stuff.
Well, let me first of all share with you a study that I did recently where I looked at the 7 greatest crashes since 1900.
Wow.
in the U.S. market.
Yeah.
I think it's a British market too, because British was the dominant market back in 1900, early 1900, in fact, till the middle probably. So I went back and took the 7 biggest declines that happened. And in every case, they occurred when you had Saturn and Pluto in a hard aspect. And within 1 year of it, Saturn and Uranus were also in a hard aspect. Okay.
Yeah.
For instance, the last time that happened was 2008, 2010. Okay, Saturn and Uranus and Saturn and Pluto were in hard aspects within a calendar year of each other. The time before that was 1999 to 2000. That was the beginning of the dot-com bubble burst.
Yeah.
And the time before that was, I think, 1965, 66. The market dropped 26% or something. Well, there was one in 1975. I'm sorry, 74, 75. There was too. The market dropped like 46%. Anyway, the point is, We're in that now. Saturn and Pluto conjunct January 12th, 2020. And starting in February 2021, which is 1 calendar year apart, you're going to get 3 passages of Saturn square Uranus. So, okay, so we had a crash. I don't think that's the only crash we're going to have. I'd like to think it is, and it might be. But the cycles tell me the probability of that being the only crash is maybe 1 out of 3. There's still 2/3 odd. There's another one coming up because these happen between years, the 5th to 8th year of a cycle. This year's the 5th year. There's still 3 more years to go, and this particular aspect of Saturn Uranus is coming up next year. So my thinking is we're going to have another downturn in the market. So as to what one should do now, in my opinion, I've been recommending this now for probably a month, and I think now is probably a good time to take it seriously if you've got too much money exposed. I've been recommending to people, if you're not a trader, you're not sophisticated with the market, you better I would suggest you take 90% of your money out and put it somewhere safe. It doesn't have to earn interest. You don't just give up the idea of trying to appreciate your capital, protect your capital.
Okay.
Let only 10% be exposed, until we get past, another downturn, my forecast was that the market would fall 20 to 50%. We did fall 38%, but it happened so early. I think there's another one coming up. There's another 20 or 50%. When you get that second one, which is somewhere in 2022, give or take 1 year, then put your money back in the market. Go back in, beyond the 10%. But for now, protect your capital and put it somewhere where you think it is safe, whether it's a savings account or a money market trust or a CD or something, but put it somewhere where it's safe and don't speculate with it.
But the guys, the sort of lazy guys who right at the start of this you suggested probably aren't that smart, people who sit it out for the long term. If you were just going to say, okay, there's 4 or 5 years or 3 years or whatever of turmoil, I'll just wait, I'll just keep it there and it will somehow or other come back again. Would that be a wise move if you don't have to take it out, or do you still think you need to?
Well, if you got a long-term view, a 10-year view usually does pay off. I think there's only once in the last 100 and some years where the market hasn't made a higher high with a 10-year horizon. That is true. The only time it didn't was after the Great Depression. After the Great Depression, it took 22 years to get back to the top again.
Yeah.
But aside from that, usually it takes, I had that in my book. I actually did that study, and I don't remember what it was, but it seems like it was, maybe a year to 3 years, the average time it takes to get back to those tops. We could get back to the top, but, and if you're a long-term investor and you want to hold it and ride through it, and you don't get nervous about it, doesn't worry you, then fine. But if you're a person who gets very uncomfortable and maybe it's your retirement account or something, and you need to start living off that, and if can you live off your savings if you're retired, if it's going to go down another 20 to 50%, you're going to have to make a decision whether you want to go through that or protect that until we get through it.
Yeah. And so the guys who do play it every day, there's a few of them I know will be watching this. So you would say stick in and do their magic, or do they follow you or something like that?
Yeah. Well, I'm a trader, and my clients are traders. I have a daily subscription report for very active traders. I have a weekly for those who want to check in once a week, and I have a monthly for those who are a little bit more position oriented. And this is, in fact, probably for the next 2 years, I probably would favor more of a trading perspective, and I'm probably an aggressive trader. And if you have that sophistication, you're probably right there with me. You like this market for the trading possibilities, but if you're somebody who likes to buy and sit and not pay attention and not be bothered by it, you probably get nervous when it goes down like it did in February, March. So I think it's fine if you're a short-term trader. Any market you can trade short-term if you got the skills to do it.
Yeah.
And astrology can help it. If you look at the studies I've done with the sun-moon combinations related to silver or the stock market or the gold market, or if you're more of somebody who likes to trade in increments, maybe 2 2 weeks to say 15, 18 weeks. That's what we call, a position trader. The weekly report, the monthly reports are good for that. I think those are all fine. The key is you want to make sure you manage your risk. You don't ever want to be in a position where you got so much in it, if it goes against you, it affects your lifestyle.
Yeah.
So either you're going to use stop losses, or you're just not going to invest. You're not going to put that much of your money aside for trading purposes.
Yeah.
Because if you end up losing it, you still got 90%. You can live on 90%. You're not going to live on 50% as well. So yeah. I think it's a good market for traders. It's always a good market for traders if you got the discipline and the willingness to analyze and discipline yourself.
I guess some of the people following this will also want me to ask you this question. Maybe not right now, since we seem to be opening up more, especially in the UK and Ireland, where most of the people are watching this. But for a while there, we all had apparently lots of time in our hands. Although I didn't seem to have. I was really busy. But the thing is it something someone who's an absolute newbie, an absolute beginner can find their way in? And could they follow someone like you and trust themselves? Or are you really talking about seasoned travelers joining someone like you,
Well, the person who would benefit from my services probably should have some experience with the market. Whether they have some studies they've done in technical analysis, chart analysis. Astrology is good too, but you don't need to be an astrologer to follow my work, because I pretty much cover that as my market timing part. I mean, I do the market timing. I use the cycles. I use the astrology to get me a time band when the probabilities are highest, the market's going to make a top or bottom from which it's going to reverse. See, astrology doesn't always tell you it's going to be a top or it's always going to be a bottom. It just tells you it's going to be one or the other, and it's going to reverse. It's a change of sentiment. So if you can identify those periods when the trend is going to reverse, and if you happen to know what the trend is, then the idea is to trade with the trend. So if, let's say the market's going up, it's a bullish trend, you want to buy on the times it has a decline, a correction, we call it. And you want to buy during those times the correction is taking place, when the astrology and the cycles say the bottom is due. And you want to get on board with the trend. Okay. Now, that we can narrow that down to a date, give or take 3 days, pretty regularly, like over 80%, like 82%. We can narrow that down pretty consistently. But even so, that's still 6 or 7 trading days. A lot can happen in 6 or 7 trading days to a trader. So how do you get it down further? Well, you can do sun-moon studies, which when the sun's in a sign and moon's in a certain sign, or they're, those last 2 to 3 days is one of those 2 or 3 days in that 7-day period that has a high probability of reversal. That makes it a double high probability. And even so, you get it down to 2 or 3 days. That's still a lot can happen. So now we got to bring in, other ideas. We got to bring in technical analysis, oscillators. I mean, I'm speaking technically now to some of your audience here.
Some of the guys will know what you mean.
If you've got oscillator divergence, let's say the market is making a new low, but the oscillator, what's this, a stochastic, RSI, whatever you follow, isn't making a new low. It's making a second loop down, but it's not making a new low. It's a higher level, but the price is lower. So a lower price with a higher oscillator reading in the time band we are looking for a bottom is a good time to buy. Yeah. Now, if you want to get it down even further, then you got to actually do intraday charts, 60-minute, 30. I mean, I use 60, 30, and 5-minute charts on the day that I want to trade. I'm also calculating prices. I mean, prices move mathematically too. If I had a $100 move up, it's common that you're going to have a $50 correction down. When it corrects, you're going to correct half of it, give or take 11, 12%. So when you get in that price range, you see your oscillators giving you buy signals or any kind of a signal that's ready to turn. You're in the time band, you got the chart pattern, you got the oscillator, you know what the trend is. Then it's just a matter of your own courage, your intuition and courage. When it really comes down to it, when do you actually click the mouse to put that buy order in is a gut thing.
We're all good at gut things here, but
I can get you to the dance. I can get you to the dance easily with our market time, but I can't get you the date. You gotta go up and ask her for the dance.
So another question that comes to mind would be, if someone is an investor, are there any particular markets that are markets with their own word? Are there any particular sectors of the economy that are probably in a good space just now because of the transits that we're traversing at the moment?
Well, in astrology, we like to look at the sign that Jupiter's in. I mean, this is just classical astrology. Wherever Jupiter's in, that's where opportunities lie.
Yeah.
Well, Jupiter's in Capricorn right now, and it will be till the end of the year, which is paper products, cement, construction, building the infrastructure, stuff like that.
Yeah.
You tend to want to stay away from where Saturn is. Well, unfortunately, Saturn is mostly in Capricorn this year too, with Jupiter. So that it's tricky when Jupiter and Saturn are in the same sign, which you don't have it right now, but you're going to have it again starting in July, and you had it up until March.
Yeah.
As far as what sectors, I'm a commodities trading advisor, CTA registered with the National Futures Association. So I'm looking at futures, commodity futures and financial futures. So I don't really play stock sectors per se, but I play commodities. For instance, gold, silver, they've been doing well. They're in a bull market. I do think they'll continue in a bull market until next year. And then you better be careful, because even though I'm a well-known gold bug, I still believe that once this high is in sometime next year, it's going to lose 50% of its value after that. Wow. So you're nearing the end, but I think there's still time for it to test or make a new high. Silver, same situation, although I'm not sure it's going to make a new high. Soybeans, food product, I think that's a good sector to get into, because Saturn conjuncts Pluto this year and Jupiter conjuncts Pluto this year. Whenever you get Saturn Pluto or Jupiter Pluto in a hard aspect, usually it's not a good growing season. There's something is either too hot, too cold, too wet, too dry. The yield isn't that good. So I think you're going to have a shortage in the harvest season. And if you don't have the supply, the demand's going to increase. That's going to drive the prices up. So I like foods, especially things like soybeans and corn.
Some of us here don't like soybeans or corn, but that's another story.
Okay. I'm trading it. I'm not eating it. Yes, I got an allergy to it from food point of view, but it does well for me financially, I guess. I guess you could say the same thing about crude oil. I mean, that's that. I don't know if that's going to go by way of the Pony Express, or it's just started a brand new cycle. It's going to make a new all-time high next couple of years. That's, I don't know what traders, you got to, the things that you trade, I guess you got to rectify your own consciousness and morality, if you will, social morality, as to whether or not you can socially consciously justify investing and trading in these types of markets. I have a lot of clients who hate the idea that I analyze crude oil. Yeah. But yet I got a lot of producers, people in the business in Texas who are crude oil people, and it's a common cycle. So there's a lot of people who follow it. I don't trade it so much myself. I don't trade it all myself, but I don't even analyze it much myself. But I do have somebody on our staff who does analyze it. Yeah. Aside from that, I'm looking at financial futures. I'm looking at stock index futures. I'm looking at treasury futures. Looking at Bitcoin, currencies. I love currencies, and that's a big thing too. I mean, if you know where the dollar is going, you probably got an edge on all the other markets, because they're all kind of tied into the dollar. The dollar is the centerpiece, I think, the value of the dollar, and it's been going down.
I mean, do you think with
the gold goes up,
potential change we've been talking about over the course of this conversation, that stuff like currencies might begin to go away? We get a common currency maybe happening, or something that, if there's going to be a new type of world, do you think that might be it? Or
I think there's major changes coming up in currencies with Uranus and Taurus. Taurus is money, and currency is an exchange of money, and the cyber currencies, Bitcoin and that group, they're going to become more and more important in the next 6 or 7 years. I don't know if they'll be legalized or not, but they're having an impact. And going back to the idea with Uranus in Taurus and Saturn squaring it. I do think there's talk and there's action starting to take place to develop a new currency, world currency.
Yeah.
But it won't happen as long as the U.S. is the standard currency of the world, and as long as it doesn't have an extreme movement. But I think it's vulnerable. The U.S. is vulnerable to seeing its dollar fall, and if it does fall too much, or even worse, if it rises too fast, then that voice for a new currency will increase. We already know that China and Russia, and I think Venezuela and some of the other oil producers are creating a petrocurrency. They don't want to trade in US dollars anymore. And we've known for 20 years or so, there's been this SDR, special drawing rights currency, that some institutions are using in their transactions. But these things are still pretty minor compared to the US dollar's dominance. Yeah. But I think with the with the US dollar being the standard world currency, it gives the US an unfair advantage in world trade. And I think nations are beginning to resent that, especially with the idea that our leadership has been calling and executing tariffs against other nations, our trading partners. That is not going to make our trading partners and allies happy at all in supporting the US dollar. If we're going to tax them for world trade in US dollars, they're going to figure some other way to get around it. So this is all part of Saturn conjunct Pluto, Jupiter conjunct Pluto, and Saturn coming to square Uranus and Taurus. The Bretton Woods Agreement, for instance, all that was being developed when Saturn and Uranus were last were back in Taurus back in the 1940s. It wasn't until they got into Gemini that it actually did change to the US dollar being the world currency. So the talk is going on now. Whether it happens in the next couple of years, I do believe it will happen in this decade. You know, I had to play it safe. Sometime this decade, I think you'll see a new world currency leader.
Wow. And I mean, given what we're talking about revolution and so on and evolution, do you think the USA will survive in terms of the United States? Is there California breaking away or any of that type of stuff going on? Or is that just fictional nonsense?
I think the United States is going to survive. Not in the form, I don't think it's going to, I don't think it's going to dissolve in the civil war. I mean, we're going to have uprisings like in fact, the aspects we have now are very much like the 1960s. You know, you read a lot of commentaries, newspapers, this is not the 1960s, it was different then. No, it's the same aspect. It's Uranus and Pluto and Saturn still involved, just like they were then. They're involved again now in these dramatic aspects going on. But I'm going back, you have to always go back to the natal chart.
Yeah.
Okay. If the natal chart is strong, you can survive. And the natal chart I use, the founding chart of the United States, is when the Declaration of Independence was voted on, not when the war began, which is July 4th, the Revolutionary War. The vote was completed before noon on July 2nd. Right. And the chart that I use, again, it's the same as July 4th in this sense. The Sun, Venus, and Jupiter together in Cancer, but I use it at noon, mid-heaven, and I got a Libra rising. So the ruler of the chart is Venus, conjunct Jupiter. Rising is Saturn in Libra where it's exalted. To me, this is a strong chart. The biggest danger, the biggest threat to this chart is now in the next maybe 3 years, next 2 or 3 years. This is the biggest threat because we're going through a Pluto return. Yeah. And in the chart of July 2nd, it's not just Pluto return. The moon was conjunct Pluto in Capricorn. So Pluto is hitting the moon and Pluto itself, and Saturn's there too. So this is the biggest threat to our existence that we've had to date, I think, 2020, 2023. But because the natal chart is so strong, I do think we'll pull out of it.
Yeah, we're rapidly coming to the end. I just wonder, I just hear someone in my voice asking, what about Brexit? You think Britain's going to do, or UK is going to do okay out of this, or is it going to struggle, or what do you think?
I think they're going to do okay coming out of it, but they're going to struggle because the whole world is struggling.
Yeah.
It wouldn't matter whether they stayed in or out as far as whether they're going to struggle. But I do think in time, once you get past 2023 or so, when the world starts picking itself up, Yeah, I think Britain's in a good position. I think everybody's going to want to trade with you. You know, you got good products, you got good economy, and you're reliable trading partners. I don't see a problem with you being independent. I don't see a problem with you being independent.
Yeah.
You know, I know everybody wants Europe to be included, including Great Britain. The British want it, and the Europeans want it. A lot of you do. I mean, a lot of people in Europe and Great Britain want this union to take place. But if it doesn't take place, I don't think that's going to negate your destiny and your potential for success any more than staying in it, because Europe's in a lot of trouble too right now. It's, you know, I think you're going to be okay.
Well, Ray, fantastic. I can't believe that hour's just whizzed by. It always does, but my goodness. Thanks for taking the time, especially your very, very busy time. It's midday and where you are just now. Where are you actually?
Well, I'm in Cave Creek, Arizona, which is north of Phoenix, Arizona. I'm in the desert. It's beautiful, sunny every day. I love waking up and seeing the sunshine. And let me just say one more thing before I close on my end here, that if I put out a free weekly report, and you can go to my website and get it, or if you want us to send it to you every Friday night, we'll be glad to do it. Wow. But just go to our website at www.MMA-cycles, that's Merriman Market Analyst, MMA-cycles.com, and just click the button, you know, click here to receive free every week our outlook astrologically for the business climate the next week, or for the market climate for the next week.
Wow, that's great. That's wonderful. Again, I can't thank you enough. I'm really inspired that you gave us the time. I'm sure everybody's delighted.
Well, so thank you for having me, Jack.
All the best and good luck with everything you're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Cheers, buddy. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.